electronics. Just go through the programming. I know there's been some questions in regards to how to get into it. Pretty simple on the new NXTs as to being able to see what you're programming, but it's just a matter of getting into it. There's actually two ways to enter programming. The easiest way to enter the programming is by pressing the left arrow and the up arrow at the same time. You press and hold them in at the same time. Hold in for, let's say 5 seconds, but 5 to 10 seconds, you should enter where it says select language English. Now this may vary depending on the age of the unit. If it does not come up with the select language English, it's not a current electronic, and if you're replacing one and it's on a twin, if it doesn't say that, the new electronics that you are getting will not communicate with the old style, so you'll have to replace both timers if the select language English does not come up first. So once you enter the language, hit the regen button, take you to the next step. You'll select your system type. The system types you get to select from are System 4, which is a single, System 5, which is interlock, which ultimately you can communicate up to 4 units, System 6, which would be parallel, System 7, which is alternating. Then on this one, it gives us the option for System 14. This is a progressive flow or demand recall unit. So ultimately, as your flow increases, another unit can be brought online, or multiple units can be brought online. In this case, we're just going to program it for System 4 as a single.
Is there not a System 9 in electronics?
Mike asked if there's a System 9 with the new electronics. If you get the demand recall, there is not. If you get the standard electronics, the 3200 NXT, it is programmed into that. Second option is your meter selection or regen type. It says meter immediate, meter delay fixed reserve, time clock delayed, and then you're back to meter immediate. In most cases, we're using meter immediate. If you're doing a single, typically you're going to do meter with the delayed regeneration. So that's what we're going to select. Next option is your valve type. This valve is a 3900, so we're going to select 3900. Regenerate flow is downflow. Everything that we typically work on is downflow. Remote signal start is off. This is if you're going to start a brine pump or a chemical feed pump, which we are not.
What was that, the signal?
Remote signal start. Next programming set point is where we select the display format. We're focused on US gallons. The other option is metric. So everything we're doing is going to be in US gallons. The next option is unit capacity. This is where you'll select in grains the capacity of the unit. In this case, we just have it programmed as 300,000 grains to go up. You just use the left arrow to the digit you want to change and move it up or down. Just like that. Capacity safety factor, this is where you're going to select your reserve or your fixed reserve by putting in a safety factor. We'll put in, for a single, we'll put in 15%.
Is that pretty common?
Yeah.
Standard.
Then you have your feed water hardness, and in this case the default is typically 15. Again, simple adjustments on it. Everything is complete. There's no coating or everything's completely legible on here, so you can read exactly what it wants you to enter. So we'll leave it at 15. Regeneration time, 2 a.m. because it was a single. You have to select the time for regen. Again, select what's most convenient for the customer. 2 a.m. we're going to select. Now we're on to our cycle timers. This is where we select our backwash. It says backwash on the bottom, 10 minutes. That's typically what a backwash is going to last. On filters you might have 14. So we're going to select 10-minute backwash. Here's a brine draw slow rinse. Again, you're going to, depending on the size of the unit, you're going to select the time. Right now it's set for an hour, and that's fine. And you have your rapid rinse. Right now it's set at 10 minutes. Again, totally adjustable, depending if you want more or less fast rinse time. Brine tank refill. Now this is going to be where your brine line flow control comes into play. Brine line flow control is going to be on the left-hand side here, coming off of your brine valve. If this is on a smaller valve, it will be printed right on your brine valve. On your larger valves, like the 3900, you're going to have an external brine line flow control. So you're going to have to, it typically is threaded right onto the brine valve itself and will be identified on there with a flow rate. The other place that it will be located is in the brine tank on the safety float. So just identify your brine line flow control. That way you can calculate, based on your capacity and resin, how much time you need to fill. And an example of that is if you had a 5-gallon minute refill flow control and you needed 15 pounds of salt per cubic foot, you're going to need to calculate that out to make sure that you have the proper quantity of brine in the brine tank for regeneration. And that's something where there's different calculations that are used, but make sure you know that before you just skip through it.
Do you have like a chart on that?
We do. We do have a
How much salt per
Right.
tank size?
Yeah.
And just always remember, there's 3 pounds of salt per gallon of water. So if you had a gallon of water, you're going to dissolve 3 pounds of salt. So no matter what you're trying to achieve for capacity, or if you got a 10 cubic foot unit or a 15 cubic foot unit, if you're doing 10 pounds per cubic foot or 15 pounds per cubic foot, when it comes to calculating it, the main thing you need to really remember is that, okay, you're going to get 3 pounds of salt for every gallon you add. So you should be able to calculate everything you need from there.
For a simple example, if you had a 10 cubic foot unit, you wanted the salt at 15 pounds per cube, you'd need 150 pounds of salt. With a 5 gallon per minute refill control, it's going to be 15 pounds of salt per minute. So 10 minutes would give you that 150 pounds.
Hey John, explain what the timer actually does. There's some people here that don't even know really the purpose of what a timer is doing. In regards to controlling, it's controlling, each of the softener tanks and controlling different functions from operation to regenerations to.
Well, let's go finish the programming.
Okay.
I can just step it through and I can show you. So you've got cycle 5, which is your pause delay. Typically, you're going to have a cycle 5 time if you're using that remote signal start for the purpose of allowing a pump to run or a chemical feed pump to inject chemical at this point after regeneration, after your brine tank has been refilled. But there's multiple reasons that this can be used. Auxiliary relay. There is an auxiliary relay output on this that can be used for different applications. This is where you program that. Another portion of it is it does have a chemical feed pump. You turn it on, you can enable it or disable it. Typically, on most softeners, you're going to have that disabled. And you have your flow meter. This is where you select your size of your flow meter. This is very important. Right now it says flow meter 3-inch paddle. It's a 3-inch valve. Typically you have a 3-inch meter with it. Where this becomes important is you've got 2-inch, you have a 1.5-inch turbine, a 1.5-inch paddle, 2 different meters that Pentair manufactures.
So what is a paddle?
The standard meter, the ones that you would think of from a Pentair standpoint, with the meter dome on top and the brass body, those are all going to be paddle. Okay, the turbine is a plastic meter with the newer style turbine, not like you'd seen in Auto Patrol or things of that nature, that has an inline turbine with a remote pickup that just plugs into it. The paddle wheels are the ones with the meter domes on top with the big brass bodies. Now this is important because you go all the way down and there's a spot for generic. The reason it becomes important is just because you have a 3-inch meter or a 2-inch meter or a 1-inch meter doesn't mean that its pulses per gallon are programmed into this timer. The only time that you will have consistency where you can select 1-inch, 2-inch, 3-inch is if you are using a Pentair product, a Pentair meter. If you're using a Signet, Clack meter, you're going to have to program it as generic and program your pulses per gallon. Does that make sense? So just because you have a 2-inch meter doesn't mean it's going to be, you program for a 2-inch meter. It's only if it's a Clack, or only if it's a Fleck meter or a Pentair meter.
Just to, so you go. All electronic meters, basically what they do is there's a signal sender, a magnet or whatever that's turning as it's, each time it turns by the pickup, it sends a pulse. So like some of them, the Clack 2-inch meters are, maybe I'm wrong on this, 20 pulses per gallon. So every time that turns 20 times, that's 1 gallon of water. So that's why we have to set it for pulses. We have to, it counts then. So 40 pulses, 2 gallons.
And that's the reason, the pulse per gallon is so important. If a 2-inch is 20 pulses per gallon, the 3-inch is 8 pulses per gallon. So if you program it as a 3-inch and you have it on a 2-inch, it's going to be way off. It's going to be counting extremely fast because it thinks it's a 3-inch, but all it cares is that it's getting that signal. So it's going to be, if you tell it it's 8 pulses per gallon and it's really 20 pulses per gallon, it's going to be reading excessively fast, and vice versa. If you tell, if you've got a 3-inch meter and you tell it's a 2, it's going to be reading extremely slow. So you need to make sure you verify what meter you have. Once you're done with that, it says programming, please wait, and that's when it will save all your programming that you just did. If you do not go through that last step, it will go back after, it's like 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. It'll go back to standard display and it will not save. So you need to make sure that you see that programming, please wait. That is also on a twin, triple, or quad system when it will synchronize your pistons. Up until that point, it won't shift things around because it's waiting for the programming to finish. Now, in regards to what Paul said, or what Paul had asked is, what does the timer actually do? A timer on a water softener, ultimately, for this example, controls a couple things. First off, it's the electronic meter pickup. So if you have an electronic meter, it is going to take those pulses and it's going to compute that information. It's going to take that information based on what we tell it for hardness and grains of capacity. It's going to figure out when it needs to regenerate. So it's going to count down those gallons. When it hits 0 or gets within that 15% that this one's programmed for, it's going to regenerate or call for regeneration. Now, the other portion that the timer does is it controls when and how these pistons move. The lower piston controls the water that's on and offline. When the piston is out on the lower side, it is allowed water to pass. Okay, so water is allowed to flow through the unit. When it is in, that is when it's in regeneration. Now, one thing to look at And this is on both the Fleck 2900 and the Fleck 3900, is your lower piston cap is colored. Okay? The black cap means no hard water bypass. If this cap is white, it means there's hard water bypass during regeneration. So when this piston moves in during regeneration, if you have a black cap, no water is allowed to your outlet. If this cap is white, water is allowed to your outlet even during regeneration. Okay, so in this case, it's a black cap. No water is allowed to your outlet during regeneration.
That's gonna be mainly like on twins.
Typically on twins, or if the application is such that they cannot have hard water go through to the machine or the process. In some cases, they'd rather no water get through than hard water. So that's something you just always need to verify every time you walk in. Every time you do a rebuild on a valve, you want to verify that you have the right piston in the valve.
Lower piston.
Lower piston. The upper piston is the same on both because that's your regenerative piston. So for example, we're going to press and hold the regeneration button. By pressing and holding it, we're going to start the motor. First thing to shift is always going to be your lower piston. On a twin, before your piston that's regenerating moves, the opposite unit's going to move out. It's going to come online. Then this one will move. So the first one shifted all the way in. Once it was in, the micro switch sent a signal to start the top drive motor. And it moves into backwash. Once in backwash, it starts counting down. It tells you it's in backwash. It's counting down from 10 minutes, which we had a program for. Now, to advance the valve through quickly, you can just press and release the regeneration button again. However, you do need to wait until the piston is completely shifted and in place, and the timer is counting down before you're allowed to advance the piston to the next cycle. A lot of people want to advance it quicker. It's not going to move to the next cycle until it's fully in the cycle that it was moving towards.
So there's no way that you can advance it any quicker?
Nope. Well, right now, like, it's counting down, so now I hit the button, and it goes.
I was just saying so you didn't like mess up their cycles.
Right, well, you gotta wait until
You pushed it now, nothing will happen.
Yep, if I push it again while it's moving, nothing happens. You gotta wait till it's fully in that cycle before you can advance it again. And that's true of this valve, or if you're dealing with any other timer, you have to wait until it's in position before you can advance it to the next cycle. So now, just rapid rinse. And the next thing is with this timer, compared to older timers, it tells you exactly what's going on. Very, very visible as to your time remaining, what cycle you're in. So it makes it very easy to deal with.
Instead of just giving you a cycle number like a C8 or a C4, it literally displays it.
Because this is a single, as soon as piston gets to home position on the top, the lower piston is then drawn back out to put it back in service. On a twin alternating, that wouldn't be the case. That would stay in until the opposite unit called for regeneration, and then they would switch. The other way that you can enter, the master programming, for those of you that are used to the 1201, the old Fleck way of programming, you still can enter master programming by programming the time of day to 12:01 p.m. and then press and holding the up and down arrows. That's how it's been since the ET timer, and they still allow you to do that. It's a lot easier to use the left and the up arrow. Then you don't have to mess around with changing the time and getting it to 12:01 exactly. If you do ever come up on a timer that's got a default password on it. The default password typically on a Fleck valve, if it comes from a factory that way, is going to be 1201. They kept that 1201 because most people that were used to programming these things had that on their mind. So to change the time of day on these, all you need to do is press or hold the up or down arrow, and it'll take you into where it says set the time of day, and that's where you can program your current time of day in AM or PM. Again, just use the arrows to select the digit you want to change, and pretty straightforward, the AM and PM switches as you scroll through. If you stop pressing buttons for 10 seconds, it reverts back to the standard display. On your standard display, there's a few things that are going to be shown to you. It says number 4, and then the pound symbol, that's just system 4. It says service, it's going to tell you if it's in service, standby, or regeneration. Also, the color of the light will be different depending on the status of the valve. You've got your time of day, and then you've got your volume remaining in gallons.
We get a lot of questions. People say, it says service.
Yep.
Do I need to have it serviced?
Yep. Yep. Service just means that it's in service. It doesn't mean that it needs to be serviced. Sometimes that can, if you've got an RGQ, which is a regeneration queued, a lot of times we'll get the call where one's in service, one's got regeneration queued, and nothing's happening. They've got hard water. A lot of times there's a communication issue that's not allowing the one that needs to regen, which is in service, and the other one just stays in standby. And there's usually a communication problem going on at that point. So you're going to want to look for that. The other thing you do have with these valves is a D button, which is your diagnostics button. If you press that, it shows you current flow rate. If you press it again, it goes back to your main screen. Now if you press it and it says current flow rate, and then you hit your regen button, that takes you through the other items that you can, I guess I consider those to be your preventative maintenance type checks, the things that your maintenance supervisors or managers or personnel are going to be going through and recording on a regular basis, because it's the pertinent information that this valve is recording and computing for you. So, for example, it says peak flow rate. Okay, in this case it's 0 gallons because it's not online, but it'll tell you your peak flow rate. It'll tell you your totalizer. So it'll tell you your total amount of gallons used since the system was reset. Ultimately, that's usually when it's brought online, but if it's ever been reset, it's going to be from the latest reset. It's going to tell you the time since the last 2 regenerations. Okay, that's important just so you can kind of get an idea or a gauge on the frequency of regenerations for a particular unit. It's going to tell you when the last regen was. And then it's also going to go back to saying the volume remaining. Then it's going to tell you the software version, which this is the 3200 NXT version 2.01. So that's all going to be good information to have. The software version is going to be most important if you are replacing the valve. That's also going to be important if you're troubleshooting and you're having some electronic issues. It's going to be helpful to have the software version handy. That way you can talk to tech support and they know exactly which version you have, and potentially if there was a glitch or updates that would be required. Any other questions?
So the NXT timer can be used with a lot of different valves then?
Yep. The NXT timer is going to be used with anything from a 1-inch valve up to the 3-inch valve.
Pentair or Fleck valve.
Pentair
Yeah.
Fleck, okay.
Right. Yep. Pretty much all their brass-bodied valves are going to be utilizing this timer.
Is it used on the stager systems?
The NXT can be used on a stager as well. But that's a little bit different setup, a little bit different programming. But yes, it can be used with the stager.
So anytime you go into the settings there, if you want to adjust just the hardness, you still have to go through the,
Nope. If you want to just adjust hardness, at any time, you know, it doesn't have to be 1201, and it doesn't. You don't have to press and hold the left and the up arrow. If you press and hold just the up and down, it'll give you the option. It'll say English, and then it gives you the option for changing your hardness. Then it gives you your regeneration day override. So if you want to set day override, that's where you can set that. It does give you your options for your regeneration time, and then you're back. That's what we would consider the installer settings. Typically, you don't need to go into the installer settings if you're getting into the master programming. We used to try to stay out of the master programming simply because it was very confusing. To get into it, it was hard to read what it was trying to tell you because everything was slightly, you know, if it was it was slightly coded, but you know, if it was an F, it looked like a 7. You know, there was very difficult to read for people that didn't necessarily know what they were looking at. If you didn't have a manual sitting in front of you, it became very difficult to program. Now, because of the full readout and the LCD displays, it's pretty simple once you get into the master programming to know what you're looking at, and when you change it, it tells you what you're doing. Anything else?
Thanks, bud.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, John.